Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Visto Show. Whew, do we have some heavy-hitting topics and updates to discuss today. Hope you're doing well. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you are tuning in live on LinkedIn, thank you for tuning in live on LinkedIn. And feel free to drop a hello in the chat. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Let me know how your Thursday's going. You might be asking, why the heck are you live on Thursday? Well, tomorrow we have Good Friday here in Canada land, and I think in some other countries as well. So I wanted to get this episode in because we have a lot to discuss, right? There's been some big changes in Canadian immigration in the last few weeks, and I wanted to make sure I go over them. And you're probably all going to be, doing your own thing tomorrow on the holidays. So I wanted to get it in. And thank you very much for those tuning in live, or if you're watching me in the future on YouTube, thank you as well. Andrew says, hi Josh. Hey Andrew, thanks for tuning in. Hope your week is going well. Hope you're excited to discuss some of these big topics, as you know as well. But let's get into them. I'm going to talk about some big updates, my opinions, ask for your opinions, all that kind of stuff as well. So as you can see on the screen here, we're going to talk about recent express entry draws. We're going to talk about the new, I shouldn't call it cap, there's a new target for the temporary residence applications that the government will be approving each year. Let me actually change that because it's kind of bugging me. It's not a cap. It's a new temporary resident, what did they call it? Target? Let's say target. We're going to talk about the update to the spousal open work permit, especially related to international students. On the same line of international students, Ontario came out with a big update yesterday, I think. Was it the 27th or the March the 27th. Big update on how Ontario is going to allocate their letters of attestation, otherwise known as Attestation Letters. So that's really interesting as well, and there's a lot to dive into. So I'm going to jump in right away. By all means, if you have any thoughts on these topics, questions, ideas, feel free to throw them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer as many as I can. Okay, enough talking like a robot. I'm going to jump right into our first topic, and one of our favorite topics on the Visto Show, express entry draws. The gift that just keeps on giving. If by gift, I mean unpredictable stuff that I can't really explain all that well. Now, for those of you who haven't been following, I'm going to share the screen here. As per usual, I'm going to put the link in the chat, or I'm going to share it in the YouTube description if you would like to follow along with me as well, because we've had 4 draws so far this month in March. On the 12th, they did a general draw inviting 2,850 people to apply. On the 13th, they did, I think, the first transport draw of 2024. Yeah. Oh, they did one in December as well. But the first transport draw of 2024. And they also then did, this week, on the 25th, a general draw inviting 1,980 people to apply. And they did the third French language proficiency draw of 2024, inviting 1,500 people to apply. Now, my first question is, what the heck does this mean? The little here, 2024-1? Anybody know what these mean? Am I missing something here? Because in February, they were using 2023-1, but this was a draw in February of 2024. So it looks like with these industry-specific draws, they started using these, I thought it was year/number of draws, right? So like, okay, this is the first transport draw of 2023. But they've all been -1, so there goes that line of thinking. And then in February of 2024, they used 2023. Is this just like an error? Or am I overthinking what these numbers are supposed to be? Or am I missing something? I don't know, but that's kind of confusing. Now, if you missed my LinkedIn post from a couple days ago, I'm also kind of confused by the draws. I don't follow politics too much, not that much further than how it applies to immigration and stuff like that. But if we look at just 2024, which is the section here that I'm highlighting, we've got 3 French draws, 1 transport draw, and 1 agriculture draw, and 1 healthcare draw. Which means we've had no STEM draws, we've had no trades draws, and there's what, 1 or 2 others? Transport they did. Maybe they've done all the others. Healthcare they did. Yeah, no P&P draws or anything like that. So, I mean, I've talked about this many times on the show, so I'm not going to go into too much details, but I just don't understand why they're inviting so many French-speaking folks through Express Entry. I've alluded to this in previous episodes. Keep in mind, Express Entry is for those living outside of Quebec. So is Canada short on that many French speakers outside of Quebec? Maybe we are. I don't know. My best guesses are maybe we are short on bilingual speakers for outside of Quebec. My guess is we're probably not. Or is this more of like a political thing where the Libs want to appeal to the French-speaking and Quebec people in Canada to get their votes? I don't know. I thought we had a housing crisis on our hands, so I was expecting more trades draws to happen in 2024. We haven't had any yet. We had 1 in December, and we had 1 in August. So even though we have apparently a housing crisis with not enough tradespeople, they've done 2 trades draws for a total of 1,000 and where's the other one? 1,500. So a total of 2,500 people invited. So I don't know. Something's not adding up. Am I missing something here? Like, did anybody have any thoughts, comments? Am I missing something? Am I overthinking it? Is this just classic IRCC? I have no idea. But my biggest qualms, which is a great word, by the way, my biggest qualms with these express entry draws, number one, we still have no transparency. So we still really don't know what to expect, what's coming next, which makes it really hard to give good advice to aspiring immigrants. And number two, I loved the idea when IRCC launched these industry-specific draws, but now they're like not really using them as I had expected, which I thought they would be using it more, and I also thought that they would be relying on them more heavily to fill holes in healthcare and trades and stuff like that. But they've only invited 3,500 healthcare workers and no trades workers in 2024. So anyways, again, I don't know if I'm missing something here. I don't know if I'm overthinking something. I don't know if I'm just plain wrong on all of this. You can let me know. But that's my thoughts on express entry. I'm going to take a sip of water. And if there are no questions or comments or thoughts on the express entry side, I'm going to segue into another big topic. We're talking about TR targets here, which I think is super interesting. Okay, and we're back. So let's get into topic number 2. Now, as we know, well, maybe you don't know, but I'm going to highlight 2 facts before I get into this story. Number 1 is, for as long as I've been working in immigration, IRCC has set targets for permanent residents. So every year they do their levels plan and they say, okay, over the next 3 years, this is how many permanent residents we're planning on, approving or inviting. And here's the breakdown, right? So there's going to be this many for express entry, this many for refugee, this many for blah, 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 this much for business, blah, blah, blah. Also, about 4 months ago now, when was it? In November, December, IRCC announced that they were capping international students for the next 2 years, which I thought was a pretty good move. Definitely a step in the right direction. What IRCC announced on March 21st, and again, I'll put the link to this in the comments or the description if you're watching on YouTube, is an announcement related to temporary residents, as it says in the title. But let's just go through it. I want to start by acknowledging blah, 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 blue, 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 right? So they start with like this is what's been going so good and blah, blah, blah. To be clear, temporary residents enrich Canada's economic cultural fabric. So they're, fluffing the pot a little. Here's how important You know it is. We're recovering from COVID. However, changes are needed to make the system more efficient and sustainable. How did we get here? We need to first understand how we got here. Overall, temporary residents. Now, there's some interesting stats here. So this is why I want to go through this section with you, because there's some very interesting data. Overall, temporary residents. Now, temporary residents are non-permanent residents or non-citizens, right? So I'm talking about visitors, international students, temporary foreign workers, that kind of stuff. Is a big umbrella term for a large number of streams and programs under IRCC management. They can be briefly broken down. Oh, okay, they did it. 42% international students, 9% temporary foreign workers under the temporary foreign worker program. So this is largely like you're coming through an LMIA, right? So a company has to apply, get an LMI approved, and then they sponsor your work permit. This is actually a tiny amount. I don't know if I'm surprised or not. 44% are temporary workers under the IMP program, International Mobility, which includes specifics such as those with post-grad work. So these are temporary foreign workers who don't need an LMIA and might fall under, certain exemptions or different programs, and they break them down here. 26% postgraduate work permit holders. So these are international students that graduated and were eligible for the PGWP. 9% spouses of said students, 10% part of reciprocal youth exchange programs. So for example, IEC, right? Like if you're a citizen of certain countries, you might be eligible to just come and work in Canada when you're young. I think it's under 35. 12% spouses of skilled workers. So, spouses of, for example, these temporary foreign workers or, maybe other types of workers. 26% arrivals, which is growing through programs like QAT and other special humanitarian pathways. So these are more, humanitarian from war and, blah, blah, blah from, I shouldn't say blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean, right? Like humanitarian, war, fleeing persecution, stuff like that. 17% for intercompany transfers, trade agreements, among others. And 5%, why is this off to the left here? 5% asylum seek it's okay. It's part of the bigger breakdown. 5% is asylum seekers who are waiting for their claim to be heard. All right. Let's break them down one by one. Okay, I don't know if I'm going to read all of it, but basically they go into more detail about the value of each one, right? So international students, temporary foreign workers with an LMIA, temporary workers who don't have an LMIA. I'm just going to summarize that quickly, and asylum seekers. Blah, blah, blah. The employment rate is at 5, blah, 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 bloobity blue, blubbity blee, for example, blah, blah, blah. Finally, we cannot ignore the pressures created by the historic volumes of asylum seekers. Okay, so they basically describing in a little more detail about each one, right? We need to ensure the number of temporary residents entering the country is at a sustainable level. Okay, I can agree with that. What have we done so far? Good news, because there is some, is we've already taken some big strides. Earlier this year, we imposed a cap, okay, so I mentioned that. So they're restricting the number of international students that are going to come in. They're going to restrict post-grad work permits and work permits to spouses, right? So basically, this number and this number have already been kind of restricted to begin with. We announced a partial visa requirement for Mexican travelers. And part of the reason for that was, I think, a lot of like asylum and refugee claims. What's next? To build on that work and ensure sustainable growth in the future, our programs that welcome must reflect the needs and changing demands. I've directed my department to conduct a review of existing programs that bring in temporary workers, and we're undertaking work to better align streams with labor market needs and weed out abuses in the system. Okay, I like the sounds of it. I'll be working with my colleague on those streams that fall under the temporary foreign worker program, notably. Okay. At the same time, we must ensure robust pathways to PR for those who wish, blah, 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 setting targets. Okay, so basically, you can read all this if you want, right? I'm going to put the link in the description. Basically, what it's coming down to is they're starting to set targets, right? This means not only setting targets for the number of permanent residents we welcome, but also setting targets for temporary residents. Starting this fall, for the first time, we will expand the immigration levels plan. That's what I talked about earlier, right? So they do a levels plan related to PR to include both temporary resident arrivals and permanent resident arrivals. The latter category is something we're doing already. This will help strengthen bloobity blue. To set these targets, I'll be convening a meeting with my provincial and territorial counterparts as well as other relevant ministers, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So basically, they're going to come together amongst the government folks and come up with a plan for temporary residents that will better align with PR and the needs of Canada. And we don't really have any numbers yet. Like, I'm just going through, this will align our efforts. They're talking about PMPs. Canada's temporary resident volume has increased significantly, now reaching up to 2.5 million temporary residents, 6.2% of our population. That's huge. Therefore, in our levels plan, we will include a target in order to reach an adequate volume of temporary residents Canada can welcome. We're targeting a decrease in our temporary residents population to 5% over the next 3 years. So that 2.5 million will come down a little bit, although our population is going to continue to grow, so it won't be probably a huge shrinkage, but it'll at least reduce a little bit and or stay kind of flat. After consulting our provincial and territorial counterparts, as I continue these conversations, blah, 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 we'll continue to provide updates. Okay, so basically, if there's one thing to take away from these comments today, it is this. Canada will continue to benefit from the important contributions newcomers make each and every day. We want every family, blah, 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 our ultimate goal, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's political stuff. So if you want to, like, read the letter of the law, please, by all means, I link to it in the description. And if you want to take a look, then please go and take a look. I think at the end of the day, it's probably good news. Newcomers make each and every day. We want every family, blah, blah, blah. Why is this not muted? There we go. At the end of the day, I think it's smart because the temporary residence situation has just gone crazy in Canada. That's why they capped the international students, right? Because these percentages are interesting, and we'll talk about them in just a second, but they also, without the absolute numbers, it's hard to imagine that, like, for example, every year the government was approving over 500,000 new international students per year, right? And then we kind of are surprised the government allows this for a few years, and then we're surprised that there's not enough supply of housing, right? As an example. So I think this is a good move in the right direction. I think we don't have enough numbers yet, right? They've basically just said, hey, here's how the numbers break down right now. We're going to start putting in place a levels plan for temporary residents, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I'll show you, for example, Canada levels plan, just so you can see what it looks like if you don't already know what it looks like, is it's basically a chart, and it breaks down, hey, in 2024, our target is 485,000 permanent residents, and here's how it's going to break down. Right? French speaking outside of Quebec, economic, family class, blah, blah, blah. Right? And I think this is a good thing to do. The problem was they were doing this at the PR level, and they haven't been doing it at the TR level, temporary residents. So all of a sudden, you look at these numbers, and you're like, okay, economic, most international students are coming and getting PR through something like express entry, right? What's the problem? This year we want to accept 110,000 in express entry applicants, but last year we approved 550,000 international students. Now, not every international student is graduating every year, but it's no surprise. Let's say a third of them. Let's say a third of them take a one-year program and graduate after 1 year. You're talking about, what, 175,000 graduates, not counting the other graduates from previous years that are on PGWPs. How are 175,000 students going to get 110,000 permanent resident spots, right? Like, there's a surplus, right? What I'm trying to say here is there is a massive surplus of temporary residents in Canada, and there's not enough room for them to graduate to getting permanent residence. So that's why I think they're doing this. I think what they're not mentioning here, obviously, is that the next 2 to 3 years, I think, right? So this is my opinion, and my opinion alone, although some other people might agree. The next 2 to 3 years in Canada for temporary residents is going to be very ugly. And the reason for that is we have so many of these temporary residents, right? Where was the number? What was it? 2.5 million? Where was that number? We have 2.5 million temporary residents in Canada. Let's assume only half of them want permanent residence, right? Because not everybody comes to Canada wanting permanent residence, although a lot of them do, right? So let's assume only half of them, which I think is like a pretty conservative guess. Let's say half of them want to get permanent residence in Canada. That's 1.25 million people. Well, this year, we're only targeting 485,000 of those people to get PR. So what's going to happen to the other 800,000 of them, right? Again, I won't go too far into detail there, but I'm very concerned for temporary residents in Canada. I think we're seeing this play out already with LMIA fraud, asylum claims, refugee claims, all the other types of fraud that's going on. I think it's only going to get worse, and I'm a little concerned over the next couple of years. So we'll have to wait and see. So anyways, very negative way to end that topic of conversation. But those are my thoughts on that announcement. Do I think it's a good move to include TR target? Absolutely. I think what gets measured, what's that quote? It's like what gets measured gets done, or measure what matters, or whatever, right? Whatever the quote of your choice. This is what happens when you don't measure and don't set targets and goals for temporary residents. The number balloons. And now what in the world are all of them going to do to get permanent residence? Your guess is as good as mine, but it's not going to look good. So anyways, I'm concerned. It'll be interesting to see how they break down the targets, right? So which ones are they going to want to limit more? Which ones are they going to want to expand more? It'll be interesting to see, but we'll have to wait to get more data from IRCC when they release those plans, by the sounds of it, in the fall of 2024. So with that, I will segue to our next topic. And our next topic is none other than the spousal open work permit updates. And this is along the same lines, right? So what they've done is, and they kind of alluded to it in this article too, on how they've been setting, a cap on international students and their family members. Again, I'm going to put a link to this in the comments if you want to follow along. But IRCC, when you came to Canada as an international student, your spouse or common law partner could in almost any situation come with you, right? With what's called a spousal open work permit. And what the government has done recently is they've changed the requirements. So now not every spouse or common law partner is eligible for this spousal open work permit, which allows you to come and work in Canada. Excuse me. So I want to quickly highlight here, your spouse or common law partner must meet the eligibility criteria listed below to be eligible for an open work permit. So this is if you want to apply for an open work permit on or after March 19th, 2024. I'm going to take one more sip of water because I'm firing on all cylinders today. Okay, starting March 19th, your spouse or common law partner may be eligible for an open work permit if you have a valid study permit and you are studying in either a master's or doctoral degree program in a university or polytechnic institution. So you're taking a master's or like a PhD at a university or polytechnic, or one of the following professional degree programs at a university. And it's basically like, professional stuff. Dentists, law, medicine, optometry, pharmacy, veterinary medicine, science, B.Ed, B.Eng. Your spouse or common law partner must provide one of the following documents to prove your enrollment in a degree-granting program of study. So you need to show a valid letter of acceptance from the DLI, proof of enrollment letter from your DLI, transcripts from your current program. Oh, provide one of the following. Okay, so only one of the three of these. I'll scroll up so you can see. We will ask them to provide additional documents such as proof of their relationship to you. So basically, they've narrowed the types of international students who can bring their spouse or common law partner with them if they choose to, which is kind of in line with the big changes that they've been making to the international student space as well. Not a huge surprise, probably a good move. I guess we'll have to kind of wait and see like how it pans out. Not surprising to see. Andrew says, do you think it would be wise to increase permanent residence numbers for TRs already in Canada? Andrew, that's a tough question because like the PR levels plan is, I'm assuming, based on some research and some, economics and some whatever, right? Whatever else that they look at or use to determine what's a healthy number of new permanent residents for the country. My concern of just saying, well, hey, we're in a big problem right now. We have too many temporary residents. Should we jack this number up by 100,000 and let an extra 100,000 temporary residents get PR, right? Like you create basically like a new TR to PR, or you whatever. Just do much bigger express entry draws, whatever, right? My concern would be, well, is that healthy for the country of Canada? I don't know the answer to that, right? It's a great question. I don't know. Like, I guess the what I would want to think about or know if I was the person making that decision is, why did we pick this target, and what could the negative repercussions be if we increased it drastically, right? Because right now, as you know, we're facing a cost of living and housing crisis. So is increasing this number of permanent residents in Canada only going to make that problem worse? Probably. And if it does, maybe it's not worth doing, right? Now, what does that mean? That means, as I kind of alluded to, a lot of temporary residents are going to be in a rough spot. So we got to look at the pros and cons, right? Which is a worse outcome? Having more PRs than we initially targeted, or having more temporary residents in Canada that aren't able to get PR, and what are they going to do because of that, right? My guess is, if we have an extra 700,000-800,000 temporary residents a year who really want PR and aren't able to get it, they're not just going to be like, oh, well, my PGWP is expiring next week, so all right, guess I got to hop on the plane and go home, right? Like, my guess is not all of those people are going to do that. And that's not a huge problem when you're talking about thousands or maybe tens of thousands of people, right? Okay, people overstay, people are overstaying every day. But what happens if you have 500,000 people, 800,000 temporary residents who can't get PR, and there's a big portion of them that say, I'm not going home. I'm staying. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to work under the table. I'm going to claim asylum. I'm going to make something up. I'm going to marry somebody for fun. You know what I mean? How bad could that get? I think it's already getting bad from what I'm hearing in the news and the recent changes that were made to Mexican travelers, right? IRCC just said, hey, we got to increase the travel requirements for Mexicans because the percentage of asylum claims from Mexican citizens coming into Canada as visitors, quote unquote, and then just like claiming asylum is skyrocketing, right? So that problem is now probably going to happen with the 2.5 million. I should just keep the page hovered over that number. Where did it go? I would have to assume that we're going to have a big problem like that. Where the heck did it go? How did I miss it? Here it is. With the up to 2.5 million temporary residents, a large percentage of whom won't be able to get PR the quote-unquote normal way, right? So that's my concern. I don't know. What do you think? Like, do you think we should raise PR numbers? Do you think we shouldn't? How do we deal with this problem? It's a problem, right? I'm not saying it should be ignored. I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong way to fix it per se, although I have some thoughts. But like, somebody dug us into this mess, And I don't know how the government's going to get us out of it, to be honest. Someone somehow is going to have to deal with this. And it's not going to look nice for those people who are stuck in the middle. Now, you can say some of them came in under very false pretenses, right? But there's also plenty of temporary residents that came as honest workers. They came as honest students, etc., etc. So anyways, this is a huge topic. I don't think it'll be the last time we talk about this, because I think it's going to continue to be a problem, as I've said, so I'm going to stop saying that. But it'll be interesting to see what the government comes up with to try and tackle it. Oh yeah, we were talking about spousal open work permits. So I mean, there's not much more to it than this, right? I put the link in the description. So if you are somebody who might need a spousal open work permit, or your spouse or partner might need a spousal open work permit, definitely check it out. But yeah, another big change related to international students in Canada and what that process may or may not look like. So with that said, we are now going to segue to a very big announcement from the Ontario Ministry of Colleges and Universities, and again related to international students. This one's interesting because they started talking about how they're going to give out their attestation letters. And before we dive into that, this episode is sponsored by a sip of water between each topic. Stay hydrated, folks. All right, let's jump in. So last but certainly not least, yesterday, great timing, Ontario, this is a news release from the Ontario.ca website, Ontario allocating international student applications to support labor market needs. Province ensuring international graduates fill in demand jobs and support economic growth. So let me give you a quick backgrounder. At the end of last year, Immigration Canada said, we're capping international students, and we're going to give each province an amount. We're going to allocate a certain amount of international students to each province. I think it was largely based on population, right? So if Ontario makes up 30% of Canada's population, it's going to get roughly 30% of international students, right? Just as a quick summary. But they left it up to the provinces and the schools to decide within that province how to allocate those attestation letters. So Ontario came out yesterday. In response to the cap, Ontario is prioritizing public post-secondary programs that will help prepare graduates for in-demand jobs that support Ontario's labor market needs. We are protecting the integrity of our blah-blah-blah. I want to get to the numbers. We have been working with post-secondary institutions to blue-bitty-blue. Okay, Ontario. Oh, wait, let me put a link to this in the comments in case you want to follow and you want to read a little bit deeper than my blah-bitty-blahs and blue-bitty-blues. Ontario will allocate, I'm a numbers guy, right? In case you couldn't tell if you've been watching this show, I like to get right to the numbers. Ontario will allocate 96% of permit applications to publicly assisted colleges and universities, with the remaining 4% allotted to Ontario's language schools, private universities, and other institutions. Career colleges will not receive any applications. Wow. Applications will be, so just for those who don't know, there are different types of schools in Canada, right? Publicly assisted, aka partially publicly funded. Language schools, private schools, right? So they're not given any money from the government. Career colleges, again, fully privately funded and run. Applications will be allocated to institutions based on the following criteria. Prioritize programs in the following high demand areas, including skilled trades, health, human resources. That was one word. Skilled trades, comma, health, human resources. So I'm assuming like nurses and TFWs and stuff. STEM, hospitality, and childcare. Cannot exceed the institution's 2023 permit levels. As a final backstop, the ratio of international permits cannot exceed 55%, exclusive of high demand areas, of the institution's 2023 first-year domestic enrollment. So they don't want more than 55% of your students to be international students. French language will also be prioritized. The government will work with colleges and universities to support them in the blah-blah-blah. Most international students seeking to study in Ontario must provide a provincial letter of attestation with their study permit application. That's what I just mentioned. This letter serves to acquire an attestation letter. Students should contact their admissions office at the Ontario Post-Secondary Institution. Students can visit the ministry website for more info. The government is taking action requiring all publicly assisted colleges and universities to have a guarantee that housing options are available for incoming international students. Invested over $32 million to support the mental health of all post-secondary students. This includes funding provided directly to post-secondary institutions through multiple grants. Introduced the Strengthening of Accountability and Student Support Act that would, if passed, help to enhance the student experience by putting in place additional measures to support health, mental health, safe and inclusive campuses, and allow for increased transparency of fees, benefiting all students, including international students. Okay. International students may apply for a post-graduation work permit after graduating from an eligible DLI. Approved DLIs under the Joint Provincial International Student Program, blah, blah, blah. Okay. We'll begin a program that is delivered through a private partner will not be eligible for a PGWP starting on May 15th, 2024. Okay. So this is like interesting and surprising. Obviously, I don't know much about this stuff, right? I don't do study permit applications much. I don't have direct relationships with schools, colleges. I don't really know the politics behind it or anything like that. So I'll just speak kind of generally off the top. They definitely threw the private colleges under the bus, that's for sure, right? 96% to publicly assisted colleges and universities. Now, again, I don't know if this is good or bad. If any of you have any thoughts or ideas, please feel free to throw them in the chat, because I just don't know. Like, are the private colleges in Canada that bad, quote unquote? I don't know. They might be. Maybe they don't deserve even the 4%. I don't know, right? But I do think it's good to focus a little bit more on public, colleges and universities, assuming that they're doing a good job. I don't know if they are. I've heard some mixed reviews about certain schools. I'm not going to name names, but I have heard some mixed reviews. So I think, assuming that the public schools in Ontario are doing a decent enough job, I think it makes sense to give them a majority. 96% is a lot, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think prioritizing in-demand programs is a great step in the right direction, right? Because what's happened over the last 8 years is everyone and their mother comes to study a business admin degree in Canada and then is surprised when they can't find a job. And we're surprised that there's such a mismatch of international graduates and the job market is not overlapping. Well, it's pretty clear why it's not overlapping if you just look at what's happened with international students over the last few years. So I don't know. These are some big numbers. It seems interesting. I think holding schools accountable with housing is great. Good step in the right direction. Spending more money on mental health. I think it's a good thing. I'm interested to know how they're spending it and where they're spending it, because our government hasn't exactly had the best history of spending tax dollars properly. But that could be a whole other conversation. And I don't know. It seems to be a step in the right direction. I'm glad they're finally doing something, right? I think part of why all this came to be is because IRCC basically forced them to, because the schools and the provinces were doing nothing about it. So do I think this is a great announcement and perfect plan? Oh, it seems to be a step. I don't know, but it certainly seems like a step in the right direction. That's good enough to move the needle. I don't know. Fabiana says it was not the same in other provinces, but I'm surprised 96% is going to public. Same here, Fabiana. From what I saw, I think BC is almost like a 50-50 split between public and private, but I don't know. Again, I don't know enough about the quality. I see you're in language assessment and language training. Maybe you have a better idea than I do about hey, are these language schools good? Are these private schools good? Or are they shams, right? Because there's been no shortage of private colleges opening up in strip malls and, basically printing money and having all their courses virtually, and, it's been a total disaster. right? So I don't know about that. So they mentioned the cap here. 22 of 23 universities will keep applications at the 2023 level. Only Algoma will see a decline from its 2023 applications. 11 of 24 colleges will keep applications same. Colleges with public-private college partnerships and Conestoga College will see the largest decline. So I wonder if this is by design. Again, I have no affiliation or relationship with any of these schools. So like, are Algoma and Conestoga bad colleges and universities? I have no idea. If anybody has any insights, I'm all ears. But anyways, I find this interesting. The 96% seemed surprising, but I don't know enough to say like that whether that's good or bad. It could be good or bad. I have no clue. If anybody has insight or feedback, by all means, feel free to chime in, but certainly pretty interesting in my opinion. So anyways, that's it for me in terms of what I wanted to cover today. As I mentioned, in case you didn't believe me at the beginning of the show, lots to cover, right? There is still so much happening and changing in Canadian immigration. It's just wild. So that's part of why we started the Visto show last year, 2 years ago, I don't remember. Just to, like, even if I post every day on LinkedIn, sometimes it's not enough to cover all the updates or to go into such extreme detail, right? Which is why we do it. So anyways, hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you enjoyed. Any last comments or questions, please feel free to throw them into the chat. Fabiana says, I think some private schools really need to go, but definitely not all of them. Yeah, and I think that's part of this shakeup, Fabiana, which is that's why I've been very critical of IRCC over the last few years, but I think their steps in the international student space have been good. Like, I think they're doing a pretty good job with trying to clean up the international student space. I think they let it become a total mess, but, you know, as of mid to late 2023, when they finally started stepping in, I think what they're doing is perfect? I don't know. I don't really know the industry well enough, but I think they're making good steps in the right direction that will help clean up the industry. It'll help cause follow-on good changes like this coming from the provinces who were doing nothing for years, right? Provinces did nothing for years and years and years, and so this is getting them, you know, on the right track too. It'll force schools to get on the right track, right? Because now the schools are only going to have so many attestation letters, so they better make good use of them, right? Otherwise, they're going to take huge hits to the bottom line if they won't be already. So anyways, I think this is all good news. Headed in the right direction. Is it perfect or not? I don't know. I have no clue. I guess time will tell. And yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I will highlight too that we have some pretty cool, for those of you who don't know, this is called the Visto Show. Visto is an immigration platform. So we automate Canadian immigration for Canadian immigration firms, lawyers, consultants, some study abroad agents. If you are spending a lot of time manually preparing your immigration applications, copy pasting onto forms, merging and compressing PDFs, emailing back and forth, you might want to check us out. We're at Visto.ai. I will provide a link in the comments as well. Right, so if you are an immigration firm, study abroad agency, stuff like that, you're spending a lot of time preparing immigration applications, then definitely check out our website. There's a lot more information there to see if it's a good fit and to book in with me if you do want to learn more. So definitely check that out. Fabiana says, I just have to reload it here. I believe Algoma and Conestoga just recruited a huge number of international students in the last few years, so they will need to adjust their numbers to have the percentage of international that they are allowed to have now. Okay, so they specifically had a large influx of international students, and I guess it put them like above the 55% mark, and so they're going to see, you know, a steeper decline as compared to maybe some of the other ones. So that makes sense. Awesome. Well, that's it for me, unless there's any other comments or questions. Thank you, everybody, if you tuned in live on LinkedIn. I appreciate you tuning in live and taking part in the conversation. if you are watching after the fact on YouTube, thank you for watching. If you could like, subscribe, all that good stuff on LinkedIn, on YouTube, really helps us in putting out more great content, promoting the show, all that fun stuff. If things continue like this, I have no doubt that there will be lots more immigration news and updates to cover in the future. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your short week, at least on our end, and hope to see you in the next episode. Andrew says, thanks so much, Josh. My pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for tuning in, as always. Have a great day, everybody. I will see you in the next episode. Take care.